and say you're not involved. Don't try to convince yourself that these problems don't affect you at all. Because now it's Lebanon, Azania, Grenada. How many more? Tell me now. How many more? Don't you stand on the sidelines and watch your children go off to war. Don't stand back and wait for this violence to come to your door. Because now it's Chile, Guatemala, El Salvador. How many more? Tell me now. How
Peace and love, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to U.S. Held Political Prisoners, U.S. Political Prisoners Annual on the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition platform, NEPPC podcast. Today, I'm going to have a special guest. Before I bring her on, I just want to talk about what's going on quickly. You know, the People's Victory had occurred yesterday. The possibilities of a new candidate coming, a new mayor coming that has different interests other than those who came before, in terms of giving common people more things or more resources that is beneficial to their everyday needs. So yesterday, I got the information rather today about Zohan Mamdani, right? I hope I'm saying his name right. That you know, he has a chance of being the next mayor. I know I did my job and voted for him. I know I had met up with him courtesy of my brother Sugar Ray, and I got to ask him a question on political prisoners, and he gave me an interesting answer. He said that, you know, I have to know what your definition is of political prisoners. You know, I appreciated that answer, and I understand in the political world, you know, people have to be cautious of how they answer questions. But with me, only thing I need is resources to take care of my business, because I don't rely on nobody to do the work that I'm not willing to do myself. So please share, please share. We see what's going on with the intense situation with Iran and the United States, and that's obviously a situation that's only going to get worse. But there has been an organized motion in the streets, and for those who have been involved in that, uh, I say salute to you. You know, people power, salute to you. Black power, salute to you, because this is going to be required in us changing our reality. We got to be involved. Let me get my sister on right now, because I know her time is crucial. Peace and love, my sister. Welcome, welcome to the U.S. Political Prisoners and you, courtesy of the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition. How you doing, my sister?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, my brother. And I appreciated your opening comments. And I'm trying
Yes.
to not surrender to the heat.
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. We gotta all stay hydrated. You know, speaking of heat, you know, intense political atmospheres going on with the situation with Iran and the United States. Also, you know, the situation with the Palestinians going through their genocide. But I think as common people continue to organize and fight, you know, we are going to come out victorious. But during the time that we live, we have to be accountable for what we accept as wrong and what we accept as right. You know, today's discussion is in preparation of July 4th, right? July 4th is right around the corner, and that historical speech that the abolitionist, the freedom fighter Frederick Douglass gave us is it's a speech that we always have to look at in terms of our current reality and how that needs to be applied to our current reality. So before I go into the speech, I just want to go through a timeline of the time that he had lived, because we want to get an idea of what was happening and what gains were going on. that raised his consciousness. So 1818, born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey in Tuckahoe, Maryland. 1838, escaped from slavery and adopted the name Frederick Douglass. 1845, published his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. 1852, delivered his famous speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. 1870, became the first African American to be nominated for Vice President of the United States. 1895, died on February 20th in Washington, D.C. So those, just to give you an idea of what the brother is going through. I know in his speech, he said, the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and a slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. You will not therefore be surprised if in what I have to say I evince no elaborate preparation, nor grace my speech with any high-sounding exordium. With little experience and with less learning, I have been able to throw my thoughts hastily and imperfectly together, and trusting to your patient and generous indulgence, I will proceed to lay them before you. I thought that was important, that he given a speech and then he's talking about the reality of what was going on as people who have been consistently attacked in terms of their self-determination. So, sister, when you think about that speech, what comes to mind?
Well, first of all, we all know he was born into slavery to a black mother and white father. At the age of 8, the man who owned him sent him to Baltimore, Maryland. Now, Maryland is very important because it was one of the major slave captivity death camps. Right today, the survivors, the descendants of those captive Africans are fighting to restore and hold on to one of the largest slave breeding camps in the world. And 60% of the children who gave birth died because their wombs were not adequate to have a birth. And that is in the state of Maryland. They're currently bulldozing the evidence of that barbarous behavior into the waters that surround Maryland. And I want to emphasize again, this was a slave breeding camp where they impregnated children as soon as they had their menses, and 60% of them died. And this is where Frederick Douglass was born. I also want to say that during the Civil War, he is the one who convinced and harangued the chief of the army, that being the President Abraham Lincoln, to arm the captive slaves on the plantations, which inevitably happened. And as you know, my brother, that is why the North won the Civil War. The South eventually won because the South did not have to surrender their weapons. We lost, even though we helped them win, because we did surrender our weapons. And that should be a historical message to those of us who are the descendants of these brave captives who understood the importance of the gun. In addition to that, Frederick Douglass was the most photographed person, not person of color, but the most photographed person of the 19th century. He understood the value of the image, and he was always photographed looking just so. I mean, he had his act together to show that the degrading images that the Europeans were portraying of the captive Africans on the continent was simply that, a propaganda lie. And he understood the importance of technology and image in the struggle to fight for your humanity. Last but not least, I'd like to say that he was a very important organizer during the Reconstruction period. And it is out of that Black Reconstruction and the Black Congress that we get the right of the working class and of all citizens in this country to have community control of public education. I want to say that again, because as you know, the current president is trying to totally dismantle the federal government institution of the Department of Public Education. And the minute you know there's something they don't want you to have, you should investigate why that is. Public education puts the rights to controlling what is learned in the hands of the parents. So if you are in a community right now that refuses to let you be a part of the history of the world, because I never say I want Black history. I don't have to say I want Black history. Just teach the truth of world history, and Black people are all over it. There is no decade, no day that you can say something happened in history and Black people weren't a part of making a positive difference. So just say you want the truth of history, world history. Put it all back what we did. Nevertheless, to get back to my point, it's out of the Black Reconstruction that you get the right to public control of community education. And with the new charter school movement, it is very dangerous for us to surrender that right. And it is interesting to note that the majority of the charter schools in this country are in Black communities. You should be concerned and be aware of just who the people are that really run the charter schools. The majority of the charter schools in Brooklyn and in New York City are Bill Gates charter schools, or under the control of this capitalist known as Eva Moskowitz. And I think enough said. Somebody wants you to have that kind of education. You should be demanding your rights that come from the Black Reconstruction era to a public community control of public education. And last but not least, Frederick Douglass' story of how he learned to read and write is a classic that we should all insist on in every library where our children are educated, because he explains so simply how he learned to read and why he learned to read. And it's a message that we should not forget. We should pass it on. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yes, excellent. You know, you always get me fired up, and with being fired up means that you got to commit yourself to organized action, and that's one of the things that I respected tremendously about Frederick Douglass, because although we go through hardships now, I can only imagine how much harder it was during the time that he was around. Frederick Douglass had a number of quotes. One is behind me that I'm using. On a virtual background, which says, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. I internalize that because, we have to endure when we are organizing people. You're going to have people down with us for a little while, then some people a little while longer. And despite all that, the fight is not over until it's over. Because even when you have victory, you have to fight to maintain that victory. And I think that statement that says there is no progress, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. I think that has to be really thought about deeply. You have to internalize that, and you have to commit yourself to the ongoing fight. I look at the situation with the Palestinians and people taking a position, to fight for them, to say free Palestine, to commit themselves to organized action so that this atrocity can come to an end. I applaud those people who are involved in that. And then you look at the situation with the fight for our reparation. When you talk about July 4th, we have to look at where we're at with reparation struggle, and whoever's involved in that, how are we supporting them? When you think about Frederick Douglass' speech, and what comes to mind when you think about how it relates to the fight for reparations?
One of the things that Frederick Douglass was always clear, prompt to say is that he was really taught how to read and write by learning how to think and make a good argument. So when we talk about the importance of his response to what does the 4th of July mean to us, what he is really saying is, if the Europeans who took this land from the First Nations that were here are telling you that they took it because these were the rights, the right to free speech, the right to bear arms, the right to the benefit of your labor, then you ought to investigate how that right applies to you. And he likes to say that he read many essays and the oratories. The Columbian Oratory was one of the first primary sources he read as a young man. And he read it because it would clarify and define his views on human rights. The Columbian Oratory was an explanation of the right of people to have human rights. And so the issue of freedom, I like the way the Muslims say it. First, you must see and recognize that there's something wrong. Then you must feel it in your heart. Then you must say something about it, and then you must raise a fist. I want to call attention when we talk about the issues that are happening in Africa. They call it the Middle East, but it is Africa. That you are not dealing with what people call racism, because racism is a term that the Europeans invented. There's no such thing as racism in biology or science. It doesn't exist. But what you should pay attention to is capitalism and colonialism. And what is interesting to me is how the Europeans, in their proxy war, using the state named Israel, are constantly acquiring land and resources. And what Queen Mother Moore used to teach us is, what is our land where we are? What are our resources where we are? It is our duty, as Assata Shakur said, to fight for your freedom. And it is your duty to win. In today's inner cities, what is our land? Our land are these institutions that someone like Eric Adams gave to the real estate interests that represent the capitalist mode of production. And when we surrender our rights to control our land wherever we are, we are giving them our resources for free without any struggle. Now, what do I mean by that? Every time you buy a soda, and I hope you don't buy sodas, you're paying a tax. If you are a working class person, you're paying a tax. If you are using the subways or the mode of transportation, you're paying a tax. And all of that tax money comes back to you, or it is supposed to come back to you, according to the modes of production of capitalism in this country, in the form of the institutions that provide service to you. You are entitled to those services as a citizen, and when you step on this soil, you're entitled to those services as a person who is always paying tax. And how do those services come back to you? The public school system, the hospital system, and the
Public library,
the housing system. And since we are the ones who have the largest statistics for houselessness, and we are the ones with the largest statistics of diabetes because we do not get quality food, and we are the ones who suffer the most amputations and severe operations that are not necessary because the system will not let us have the state-of-the-art medical treatment, and because we are the ones who cannot control our schools, because we cannot control the curriculum in our schools or who's hired in our schools or the contracts in our schools, then we are economic modern day slaves. And we are victims of colonialism. And so I approve of the fact that Eric Adams didn't get in, but I'm not going to assume that the new mayor is going to be any different because he's still a part of the Democratic Party structure, although they claim to be something else. So it is our duty to struggle. It is our duty to fight for our freedom, and it is our duty to win. Our duty is to hold his feet to the fire. Our duty is to hold the city council's feet to the fire. Our duty is not to let any local politician speak to the mayor unless they speak what we want. And our number one demand is that they free our political prisoners.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that tremendously. You spoke on something that is going to lead me to the next point that I was going to make, and regarding the criminalization of poverty in capitalist America, and that's the direct title of of Jalil Abdul Mutakeen's book, "We Are Our Own Liberators." And I thought that this page, this particular piece, fit appropriately on what we're talking about, because when we're talking about Frederick Douglass, he's talking about the time that he lived in, but it directly points to what's going on now. And in this part, it says, it starts off with a quote, from a story. It says, "An anonymous poet in the 1700s wrote about crime. The law will punish a man or a woman who steals the goose from the hillside, but lets the greater robber who steals the hillside from the goose." When talking about the greater robber, it seemed particularly appropriate in the midst of the biggest financial ripoff in the history of this country to think about the billions of dollars, the savings and loans criminals stole, followed by Enron, and about how most of them got away with it. I thought about how the complete insanity of this country defines crime in society. If you steal $5, you're a thief. But if you steal $5 million, you're a financier. In 1994, 30% of this country's wealth was in the control of 1/2 of the people. 80% of the wealth was controlled by 10% of the people. I think that is a crime. In the dictionary, the word crime means an act that breaks a law that has been made for public good. Crime in one country, the dictionary continues, may be entirely overlooked by the law in another country, or may not apply at all in a different historical period. He even breaks it down even further, even deeper. But I think that is the gist of it, of what he's saying, is talking about, whoever has the power has the ability to define what is wrong or what is right. And I think that, when we have speakers like Frederick Douglass, speakers like Malcolm X, that are very clear politically, then they give us more ammunition to go at our oppressor. So I'm very appreciative of this particular piece. What is your take on poverty being criminalized? And
Well, I think that's obvious, because you can tell who the colonial administrators are when first thing Eric Adams did was to invite the National Guard to the subway system of the New York City, and that was to terrorize and to criminalize the working class that is forced to ride the subway system. Another way they do it is, if we had a real Democratic Party structure, they would fix the tax system so that those people that you identified as having 80% of the wealth, they now have 99% of it, by the way, they would pay their fair share of public taxes. In a city like New York, they do not pay their fair share. The stock market in New York City does not pay its fair share. The wealthy who live in New York City do not pay their fair share. If they paid their fair share, we would not have an issue of hospital service in New York City, which we do. We would not have a housing crisis if they paid their fair share. As a matter of fact, in New York City, there is a legislation that allows these real estate interests not to pay taxes for 5 to 10 years. I understand they're trying to reverse that now. Now, what that means is they target a Black community or economically depressed community, and they say, oh, this poor community, they don't have adequate housing, and so we're going to build housing, and we will include average medium income in some of these housings so that the people who live there can afford to live there. It's a lie. They do not pay taxes, so they're getting a boom in the form of billions of dollars. If they just paid their fair share of taxes, we could afford to build more housing. But even more than that, the housing that did belong to the working class, that came out of the legislation after World War II, known as in HUD, housing supported by the government, built by the government to standards of safety that are mandated by the government, is being privatized. And what that means is there will be even less housing than affordable apartments and housing than there was before. In addition to that, New York City is one of the places where they are warehousing apartments. What that means is landlords are allowed to let their apartments go empty until they get the price that they want for that apartment. Allegedly, the new mayor coming in claims he's going to address that issue. Now, how does that lead to criminalization? If you do not have a home and they're passing legislation that you cannot be on a park bench, you cannot be in a park, you cannot sleep in a subway, then you are arrested. Over a period of time, houselessness in a capitalist country leads to mental depression.
Absolutely.
And they define that act of being human because you're being deprived as a crime, and they incarcerate you for it. And that is why in America, we have the largest number of people in prison than any country in the world. And most of them are there as a result of economic deprivation.
Absolutely. You know, as always, I appreciate you educating me and adding more fire to my fire, because it's always important that we have those who are doing the work who engage with us, so we got that inspiration. And you inspire me tremendously, sister. And before we close out, you got about 3 more minutes. I always try to present an idea or concept that I want my viewers to really focus deeply on. And I just want to go back to Frederick Douglass quotes. And one of his quotes said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." I look at that as a parent and as an uncle, right? And that I have responsibilities to make sure I conduct myself a certain way in terms of dealing with the future, which is the upbringing of our children. As African, we say it takes a village to raise a child. Now, all those villagers have responsibility to conduct themselves a certain way. So the topics that we're talking about, we got to make sure we're organizing around that. We got to make sure we educate our children on who did what and why. We got to educate our children on the history of Frederick Douglass, this famous, important speech. We have to make sure that our children are participating in cultural events like coming up July 4th, 5th, and 6th at Commodore Park, International African Arts Festival. The Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition will be having a table. We'll be talking about our political prisoners. We got to get our children involved in this life that we are been living for quite some time. When I'm saying us, I'm talking about those who took the responsibility to fight for our self-determination. We gotta let our children know that, you know, nothing is going to be given to them. Where there's no struggle, there's no progress, that Frederick Douglass taught us, and they have to understand that very seriously. You know, what would be your advice or your recommendation to parents as well as people of our village who are responsible for the upbringing of our children in terms of educating our children about what they need to do and why?
First of all, I would thank you for that wonderful question. And I recommend that every parent, especially parents who are descendants of African Americans in this country or Africans in this country, I would really recommend that you study your own family history, because there is no African that's family goes back 400 years that doesn't have an amazing story of struggle and of overcoming the death camps in America. Secondly, I would recommend that if they can this weekend, weekend of July 3rd, 4th, and 5th, when they finish Commodore Park, go to Philadelphia and celebrate Mumia. Let's not forget the warrior, Mumia Abu-Jamal. And you can go to the Mumia Coalition website and learn about the buses and groups that are going to be traveling from different cities to Philadelphia to commemorate Mumia. Lastly, but not least, I would recommend that they read to their children excerpts of some of the writings of Jalil Monteking, but also remember Sekou Odinga. Comrade Sekou Odinga recently had a birthday, and this is one of the Black Panthers that helped to free Assata. Explain to the children who Sekou Odinga was. And it is a story more exciting than any movie that Hollywood has ever produced. And I thank you for that opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, sister. What's the call?
Free them all.
Peace and love. See y'all next week.
Never see Indians live proud and free before the oppressor's slavery. Black people live proud and free. How many more? Tell me now, how many more? Don't you stand on the sidelines and say you're not involved. Don't try to convince yourself that these problems don't affect you at all. Because now it's Lebanon,